Welcome to a spooktacular edition of UberCube, where we discuss all things spooky, but with refreshments. This is your host, Anthony Adams, aka Spooky Bear, and I'm joined by my other host.
Hi, I'm Stu the Skeleton.
Stewie?
Stooky, starey skeleton. I'll go with that.
Yeah, we'll go with that. And
your favorite Mayfair.
Mayfair.
So we have a fun episode. We're on our Journey to CubeCon series here. It's currently September the 29th is when we're recording, but we're coming up into that spooky season. So by the time this episode rolls out, it would officially be October.
That's right.
And last year we did a Halloween special while at CubeCon, but decided to get a little ahead of it this time, a little bit more organized. But we want to talk about a cube that I have designed, UberBear's Horror Cube.
It is.
That has been honored to have been chosen to be one of the featured cubes.
And a wonderful cube it is. Definitely up there in my favorites as far as UberBear's cubes are concerned. It's awesome.
It is something that I've put a lot of time into design. It's quite possibly one of my oldest cube designs. Yes, I have a 540 powered vintage cube that's kind of follows the Moto design. But as far as the first time that I decided to break out and do the thing and become an official curator was designing UberBear's Horror Cube. So I'm super stoked that it's been selected to be one of the featured cubes. And I'm really excited about everyone getting the opportunity to draft it. So before we go any further down this horrible, scary plane that I have designed, we're going to do the thing that we always do, and we're going to enjoy our libations of the show. We're going to start out. May, what are you having on this horrific evening?
I'm having blood. I'm kidding. It's wine.
Yes.
We'll call it blood for this episode.
Blood.
Sip your blood there.
Yeah, enjoy your...
Anthony, what you got for us?
I am actually having a Sweetwater 420 strain G13 IPA. It smells like hemp.
Very nice. Mm-hmm. And I've got myself a Wicked Weed Brewing Appalachia Session IPA.
I actually love that.
I do too.
That's one of my favorites. All right, let's crack them open. Let's get going. Oh, I love the smell of this beer. So, love the smell of beer in the morning. But anyways, let's get to the topic here. So, UberBear's Horror Cube featured CubeCon 2023. This is going to be kind of a top level, what should you expect? And while we do this, we're going to seed a little bit, I guess, the design aspects of building a typal cube, but also how to make them dynamic. And that's one thing that our expert here, May, can help along this conversation. It's not just about the, I'm supporting these different factions within the typal environment, but rather how do you make them interesting? How do you make them blend? How do you do the cross-pollination? What dynamics can you inject inside of said environment to make it so that it has replayability? It's fun, and it's not just creature feature. And that's always a challenge with typal designs.
Absolutely.
May, you're very familiar with that. You have any thoughts on that before we start diving into this?
Yeah, designing typal for a cube environment can be really tricky because it's very, very easy to end up in those rails where drafters feel like, oh, I just have to pick one type, and then that is the draft. And I think that you've done a pretty good job of making it so that way there's plenty of drawing outside the lines here, so...
And I'm going to provide the listeners, as we go down this, some techniques that I did in order to set the stage for that. Because as May stated, it is very easy to say, this is what you're doing. I am doing vampires. And it's a kind of a trap, right?
It is, well, it can be. I was going to say, I am actually quite excited to talk about, and I think I might have mentioned it on a previous episode, in a much earlier iteration of the Horror Cube, where I actually just did exactly that. And built one of the most powerful decks I've ever built when drafting any of your cubes. But we'll get to that. So, Anthony, this is a 360 card cube. It's very typal centric, right? As you say, You've got the different creature types, the vampires, the werewolves, all that kind of good stuff. But there was an overarching kind of theme, right? And it wasn't a specific necessarily magic theme, even though there was kind of a plane that you were following fairly closely, but there was a genre almost that you wanted to encapsulate with this cube. Tell us about it.
Yeah, so it's a gothic horror design, which does that best is the plane of Innistrad. So every time a set comes out that revisits that plane or other ones, I'm really heavily looking at that for new inspiration to add to the cube to continue to break off of that typal tracks. We're going to call them railroad tracks, right? May kind of put it that way. And we want to make it so that the drafters have lots of opportunities to splinter off and make decisions so that you don't get the repeated play style. And it doesn't matter from any typal design. This could be merfolk or goblins or hominids or whatever, right? Thalids, who cares? If you try to do too much of that, if they don't blend with one another or give other avenues for your drafters, it will dry up pretty quickly.
Yeah, it means, and I will say that that's not something I'm unfamiliar with, and it's not a very fun draft experience as well as a play experience, right? Because the draft almost kind of takes care of itself. People pick their lane fairly early on, right? They get a bomb in whatever faction that they think, oh, okay, I've got this huge bomby werewolf or bomby vampire or whatever, and then it just organically becomes that they're going to draft that type, right? That creature type. So I think that is one of the things that I love about this cube is the fact that you can be so dynamic when you're drafting it, and it's not just, okay, I'm going to pick werewolves, and next pack, okay, I'm just going to take another werewolf.
So this is a very Vorthos top level design aspect. It's something that May and I do best, is where we think of an idea and we start constructing from the idea and building down from that idea. But it is easy when you're doing that is to make too many straight lines, and players are looking for dynamic builds. They want mechanical aspects of the cube where they can make choices that are outside. It doesn't want to feel like just necessarily retail limited. And I'd say the best way to emulate, say, for instance, Ravnica, when we did Return to Ravnica, where you got the box of the guilds, and it was really awesome, and I enjoyed it very much. But there's only so many times you'd want to keep playing Dimir over and over again.
No,
right?
that's not true. I want to play Dimir
you need
over
diversity.
and over and over
As
again.
a color, yes, I agree. But as far as opening up those packs and being
Sure.
subject to those cards over and over again, you want repeatability. And that's very important to keep in mind with both the Fey Cube and Uberbear's Horror Cube, is that we both kind of started with that as the skeleton of the cube, but then found ways to break out of it. So I think it's a good point. May, do you have anything to say about that before we proceed?
Yeah. We definitely have a different approach with both of these, even though they both have typal themes. And I think that it is important to note as cube designers, there are lots of different avenues to take when it comes to interweaving those typal themes with other things that you're trying to do. And it's important to know what kind of options you have. So,
yeah. So back to the Horror Cube, as far as the structural design, the bones of it, it's a singleton design. And as Stu mentioned, it's 360, and we've said typal at this point, and it's Strahd expanded, as we've said. And then there's a couple of rules that I put as the cube evolved was no tutors was a way to make it so that we didn't have repeated cards, so that you didn't have two ofs essentially for everything you wanted. At one point, there was demonic tutors, there was vampiric tutors, because I was trying to push the power level, but I actually broke it by pushing the power level. I started causing imbalances by trying to push too hard.
I think automatically effects like that, for me as a drafter, if I have the ability to be able to take cards that are just going to go and allow me to get my most powerful, that's probably 9 times out of 10 going to push me in that direction where I want, that higher level of consistency. So I think that makes perfect sense in something like this where you want it again to be a bit more organic, that you take those kind of cards out.
And as far as the logistical breakdown, intentionally there are 13 more black cards than there are every other color pairing in the cube.
Why is that, Anthony?
Triskaidekaphobia, baby. Let's go. But yeah, I just thought it was so neat to do that. That was something, an Easter egg that's long since been found, but I did do that as a design goal too. Another thing that's important when you're doing typal builds and you're following those factional groups, and let's just say it doesn't have to be werewolves or zombies, it can be merfolks or goblins, or as we said before, it could be unicorns, doesn't matter, is that you want to be really limiting on your lords. And lords have a lot of different ideas or connotations behind them. It could be just your static anthem type lord, that +1/+1, or it could be a lord that highly supports that group, but you don't want to put too many in there and oversaturate it, because you basically make dead draws in the draft by having an oversaturation. There's only the person who's drafting the werewolves may not want some spirit lord that's bobbing around the table around in circles. So that's a consideration with typal builds.
Yeah.
And it's the allure to make them better. May, do you have any idea of that?
Yeah, the big problem with lords is, in a traditional sense, that when they come up in a pack, they are only wanted by that one deck. And when you are creating your cube to be as diverse and interwoven as possible, so that way people aren't just stuck in those lanes. When those cards come up, it's not just a way to pull people into that lane, but it's also just you get a pack that's one less of a card if you're not building that deck. And when there's so many different kinds of decks, then it's less likely to be picked, and it's kind of a trap for curators to keep up with.
I will say I don't hate Lords, and I completely agree. They are very, very linear, and I also agree they're only really going to be taken by the person that's drafting that type of card, right? That werewolf, that vampire, whatever. However, I think Lords are quite strategy specific in a lot of ways. Like if I'm trying to draft a control deck, a Dimir deck, do I really want a Lord that's just going to come down? It's going to boost my creatures, and that's great, but is it going to have any fun, enter the battlefield, or activated abilities, or something like that? So I don't hate them in the times that I've drafted them. They've been powerful cards when I've drafted more aggro-y type of strategies, where the pumping of my creatures for just a couple of mana in a lot of cases is pretty powerful. But I agree, yeah, sometimes that you just look and you think, okay, it's boosting all my creatures, but is it fun? And
right.
Sometimes it's not.
And you want to kind of, if you're going to do the Lords, it's a good idea to do diversity in them. They don't all have to be creature based. Some are going to be enchantments to give a net positive to that group or that faction, or some other options that's like a one-time, when it enters the battlefield, it buffs all humans +1/+1 to a turn. But if you're going to do that, you really want to try to keep, I think it's a good idea to have a structural count of how many you're allowing to enter that environment. It's a good framework to say, I'm going to have 3 Lords out of 50 cards, for example,
Yeah.
right? And then use that as a framework. May, do you have something to add to that?
Yeah. So to take us off our rails a little bit, just to follow the trend here of rails and whatnot, is Champion of the Parish. And it is a 1 white for a human soldier, 1/1. And whenever another human enters the battlefield under your control, you put a +1/+1 counter on it. And what's cool about this card, in particular in your environment, is that humans are just the most dense type of magic in general. So even though when you see it in a pack, it reads like a human matters card, even if you get one additional trigger, you're still going to feel happy about it because you have a 1 mana investment. And this is a case where your typal payoff is in a way that it's unobtrusive. So that is definitely a good approach, especially when it comes to drafting this environment of, hey, I see this in a pack. Humans are going to come up a lot. A lot of your good cards are humans. This is likely to end up in not just a humans deck, but just general white weenie stuff.
And I will say, I loved that about this cube, and I love that about the Fey cube as well, is the fact that I did never feel pigeonholed into, you have to draft this creature type because that's the way that the cube is designed or curated, right? For me, it was, I can have a deck idea, and I tend to try and look for similar effects in those when I'm building decks, when I'm drafting, and so not, being able to go outside of just the type that has certain effects that I'm interested in. That's what I like about this cube and the Fey cube. And Anthony, I think you did a good job of that.
Yeah, so another one of the major goals moving past the Lords, and that's important, is I wanted to, again, make this so that it's more dynamic, more interesting. So I pushed this cube pretty hard, the power level. And at some points, I actually pushed it too hard. And we talked about that in a previous episode, where there were grizzle brands and stuff like that in there.
There were times where
I
there was
wanted
some
to tone
outliers.
it back, but and that's been discussed on a previous episode. But this is the CubeCon version of it. I've pushed these spells as far as I can push them to make it feel almost vintage, almost power maxed, but still has those aspects of Innistrad, right? So it doesn't feel like a retail limited, because you're getting to do really push stuff like Mana Confluence and stuff that we'll talk about. But there's ways that you can kind of take those traditional sets from those typal planes, those basic factions, and you can raise or elevate their power levels by doing, and we talked about this in an episode that we recorded recently, where we're talking about power bands and power spikes and how you can just sprinkle in a few of them there to kind of give those spikes to make this faction have something that's spicy, but also cross-pollinates with the other factions. Or you don't have to do a faction at all for that matter in this cube.
Exactly.
You can just straight up be Spellslinger, right? You don't have to do the thing. I'm not making you do it.
And I think being able to really min-max on a strategy that is not, like you mentioned vintage, like there's definitely strategies in this cube that are not viable in a vintage environment, right? But being able to go super high level with some of those strategies that, and I know we tend not to talk about Commander too much, but let's say, for example, Aristocrats. Aristocrats is a very, very popular Commander theme, right? Commander archetype. You're not going to be able to push that at all in a powered vintage cube. There's just not the support for it. It's not fast enough. But in a cube environment like this, where you're going to push the power level as hard as you can and try and include those different kinds of themes and ways to deck build, that's another thing that really drew me, like right from the get-go with this cube, is being able to like push the power levels of those sort of non-vintage power level archetypes, but still have like a powerful experience when you're playing the cube.
Yeah, they're maxed out. And so we recently did the Extra Life event where we got to do some more playtesting, and it confirmed an idea that I had. One unique thing that I've also done is I'm not using strictly the Innistrad lands. I'm using shocks. I'm using fetches. I'm using pain lands, but they have to be on flavor, basically places you wouldn't want to walk, swim, or fly, right? You don't want to go in these locations. So it's very art oriented as well. But what that did is I severely increased extremely increased the land density. That opened up this wide array, breaking outside of those guild-like typal group sets that Innistrad love to do. For example, werewolves are Gruul and zombies are Dimir. But by increasing that land density, it allowed me to push that envelope on this cube so that people are doing more 3-color, 4-color, and getting more inventive with their build strategies while still maintaining that unique typal aspect of what this cube provides. Made, you had something you wish to add?
Yeah, what's cool about the lands in your environment is it's just the typical cube thing of fixing in lands are important, and being able to allow your players the flexibility to choose their decks and build their mana fixing as they please. You have 14% of your cards in here as lands, and that's and it's like 0.3% above retail. And getting that extra fixing in this environment really lets those 2 to 3 colors shine, but I would say that it's a bit more aggressive, so your 3 colors are going to struggle a little bit more in this environment.
I would beg to differ. I've been watching, and the reason why I'm going to say that is because they've been unlocked. Players are getting more experimental in this cube. Not even a year ago when players played this on my original mana base, it was the werewolves were Gruul. They were green and red. It was the spirits were Azorius, white and blue. And that's just the lines you saw. And they would back it up with some kind of counter control spirits, right? The minute I increased this mana base, I started seeing players start doing a lot more splashing, a lot more going outside of that. And it wasn't just the mana based, it was more of the multicolored mana based. I don't run any triomes, but I do run in this a lot of, like I said, pains and shocks. So they have options, and the talisman actually compensate for this as well too. So I count that towards that base in so many words as well. But it increases I guess it pushes that envelope to allow the spells to be bigger. And I've been watching, recently we had our good friend Kirby that at the Extra Life I'm sorry to the others, wipe the floor with Mardu Aristocrats. And then I saw another player at SEG Con do Rug Werewolves, where we're going to call it splashed, air quotes, splashed, cryptic command. That's what he said.
You don't splash.
He splashed it. Yeah.
That's impossible.
It was amazing.
Okay, so
the main reason why I came to that assessment is based on the power of your 3-drops being really, really good.
Oh, yeah.
And when you can drop a 3-drop that can put a lot of pressure, say Garreach Bandit or the Handwear Garrison, whatnot.
Mm-hmm.
And that's just in red. That's not even counting things like Champion of Lampolt, etc. And when you have these very powerful 3-drops, that is something to consider as a drafter.
I wonder as well if the more you start to provide those outlets, right, those extra funky pieces of tech that are not in the colors of the faction or the type that you're drafting, right? I will say that when I have an idea about how I'm drafting, I'm fairly aggressively looking for those cards and those types, and I'm willing to go outside and look for other things that might be cool. The second that I start to find packs that don't include things that I like or that are interesting or that are fitting with the strategy that I'm drafting, I'm taking lands. And I might find myself in a position halfway through pack 2 or into pack 3 where all of a sudden I've taken 2 or 3 lands as well. And now that has enabled me to like, oh, that's a cool card. And it may even be 2 colors that I wasn't even thinking about playing when I was midway or to the end of pack 1 or midway through pack 2, but now all of a sudden I have the mana base to support it. And again, that may go back to now you've expanded that mana base and now it's just easier for drafters to look and think, okay, I have this extra mana support. I can fix for those colors to include those cool effects. And it just opens up more doors. And here's the other flip side of that, but the good stuff.
Yeah, the good stuff is a thing. Like toolbox builds exist here. But going back to what May said, for the people who do the grassroots factional Selesnya equals humans and some kind of overrun effect, or it's zombies or Dimir, kind of a little bit of splash of counter magic, but mostly blue-black zombies, they get really straight line plays and they can push to the win. But as of late, the players that are willing to splash and be a little bit more dynamic with those Mardus and the Grixis playsets, because I've also parsed, and I know the Color Pie does this for me, but I've also been very intentional as to who gets what, right? As far as black has the majority of removal, hand stripping is going to be on black, so if you want access to early interaction, like Inquisition of Kozilek, you obviously have to be in that set.
Black sounding real good right now.
Yeah, but it's also 13, so it's contested. I made it so it's contested as well. And you'll see it, there's a lot of splash, but I've been watching players that do monocolor, and they do quite well with it. It just depends on how adventurous you want to be in this cube. I've been pleased with the outcomes and the feedback that I've gotten in this cube. Our good friend Kirby, again, to kind of views him as the signpost of improvement. He had the opportunity to play at a SEG Con where him and his friends gave some feedback about certain cards. My reanimator was too fast. It was too accelerated. And they told me I should tone that back a bit. And once I did that, the cube really leveled out. And Kirby had the opportunity to draft it again at our Extra Life convention. So he's got to do both in mixed crowds and was really observing how the cube has evolved, and it was based on their direct feedback from those individuals. So a lot of lines of play there to, I guess, break down and talk about. But the cube has, in my opinion, really it's in a good place right now.
No, I agree. Just on first glance, because I haven't actually physically played it yet, but I'm excited to.
Yet.
Yeah.
But what I've seen from your cube, because we look at each other's cubes, it happens, but a lot of what we've talked about and what I've seen of your cubes is that I think that it's a good place at a glance. There's not really anything that I point at and say, maybe this is a little too out there, but I think that when people are drafting this, they will be able to find lots of different lanes or lots of different colors, not only because that 14% land density, but also just, like you said, the signets and whatnot, and people are going to have an easy time either going mono or even up to 3.
Right. So I have this other thing that I like to do as a curator, and I've done it in virtually every cube that I've ever built. And I like to have a Titan cycle. For instance, in Uberbear's Artifact Cube, also featured, I have the Gear Hulk cycle. And this one here, they gave me a gift not too long ago. I believe this was Midnight Hunt. They gave me the Adversary cycle.
Cool cycle.
And I'm going to say that they're not all created equally, and I don't care, because every one of them 100% represent those factions or that typal groups, which we can just you could lay these out and see them. Humans, spirits, zombies, vampires, werewolves. They did that for me. They gave me a gift.
Sorry to interrupt. I absolutely love the adversaries, and that's just my personal take.
I do too.
If I see any of these in the pack, I'm going to be ecstatic to take one.
So they're really strong in this environment. Whereas, like, if we had to do this vintage cube conversation, Intrepid is the best, followed by, in my opinion, Bloodthirsty Adversary, and then they kind of, I guess, teeter off from there. But that's what it is. But in this,
I'm surprised Primal's not higher for you.
I love Primal, except Primal's the only one that's a little strange because it does an interaction with target lands you control become 3/3 wolf creatures, which is neat. I like it, but it's also your lands are tapped to do the thing. It doesn't untap them. That's why Primal's going to be my last place. We'll go ahead and read it to you. So it's Intrepid Adversary, Spectral Adversary, Tainted Adversary, bloodthirsty adversary, and primal adversary. And I'll read primal since we were just discussing it. And these will all be included in our show notes, and they will all be at CubeCon while you're cracking packs. But primal adversary, for 2 colorless and 1 forest, you get a creature wolf, 4/3 trample. When primal adversary enters the battlefield, you may pay 1 colorless and a forest any number of times. So let's pause on that. What's interesting about all of these adversaries is that you don't pay up front. These are kind of like delayed kicker cost. And so for anybody that's never drafted this before and you listen to the show, if you play one of these, don't pay all that in advance. Pay the initial cost once the ETBs, if it actually survives. Then you pay this secondary. We're going to call it, everything's a kicker, right? That's been discussed on the internet ad nauseam.
Basically, it's all kicker.
It's a slowed down
It's a
kicker.
postponed kicker.
So you pay the 1 colorless and the forest any number of times. When you pay this cost more than one time, put that many +1/+1 counters on primal adversary, then up to that many target lands you become 3/3 wolf creatures with haste that are still lands.
Let me tell you right off the bat why I dislike this card. First of all the rest of the adversaries cost 2 CMC. There are 1 generic and 1 of the color. Primal is the only one that is 2 colorless and 1 green. Then it has this cool ability when it comes down that you can pay the 1 generic and the 1 forest and start ramping out all these extra creatures. Sounds like a great finisher, but why is it 3 mana for a 4/3 instead of being 2 mana and just make it a 2/1?
I think I'm going to go with argue that it's a balancing point. It's a ballast point they had to do. Not only is it a 4/3, but they're also forcing you, if you're tapping your lands, to not have so many wolves for that cost. It's like a little bit more investment to
I
get
want
the
it as a
3/3.
finisher. I want this to come down for 2 mana.
Yeah.
And then I want to be able to spend the 2 mana per.
Yep.
Like, even if it's 2 or 3 times. Like, this gets expensive. Like, you're talking 5 mana just to activate this on 1 land. 7 mana to get it on 2 lands.
Keep in mind that this is like a turn 6 play, where you're not trying to play it on turn 5, 3 for the initial cost, 2 for the kicker, because like Anthony stated, that your lands are going to be tapped. And on turn 6, you're going to have an untapped land to attack with. And I see it as, I'm happy to play this on turn 3. I'm happy to play this on turn 6.
Yeah, it's early. These are all early game, late game. That's what I like about these. And then even that one, in my opinion, not being the best of the group, but they all serve a purpose.
Sure.
You still have the Emerald Wolves and stuff like that in here to bolster that. Because
Point
Lords,
is, I love this cycle.
I do too. I love
great.
it. I love it, and it was made for me, right? Just like Woe was made for May. This was made for me. So we kind of talked about, like, and this is going to be a couple of cards that are going to be very well known to the community, but like, how do you take a typal or like a retail limited set and push the envelope up, right? And some of the cards, and we've talked about this before, is Force of Will. And we've had this conversation on numerous shows where we've talked about how it does such a good job of scaling the power level, right? It's a good scaling card. But then you can also supplement blue, in my opinion, if you can balance it properly and, take away some of its other attributes, is a good ballast point for peaking a cube. Like pushing, like if you want to basically have a spearhead as the first color to push up, you can bring the others up with it if you can balance that properly. Does that make sense what I'm saying, May? If I push like Mystic Confluence in this environment, then I am now can run stuff like Inquisition of Cool Zealic and things like that, because they start to have a reason for their existence. Does that make sense?
I mean, as an Izzet player, it makes me ecstatic because I see the blue spell section and I'm just salivating at the mouth, especially after we just talked about the whatever the vampire adversary is called. Sorry, but
yeah,
bloodthirsty.
Yeah, bloodthirsty. That with the blue section just has me salivating at the mouth as an Izzet player. So
I agree. And I think Mystic Confluence for me, we talk about scale. Mystic Confluence. The drawing of a card is obviously wonderful. Drawing cards is incredible. The mana leak effect that it has is wonderful as well. And obviously you get to choose 3. And the return target creature to its owner's hand. I think this is very good and we've talked about power bands in the past. I think this card scales best. And when I say best, I mean is more balanced when you have a wide power band and it's not just, hey, I can wait until all the 6 and 7 drops have come in and bounce them. And then I've just got so much advantage from that it's just insurmountable. I think when you have those difficult to handle, again, you mentioned the 3 drop is such a powerful slot. Mystic Confluence, okay, it's great if I can cast it on turn 5. Maybe they've got 1, maybe 2 creatures that I'm bouncing. Maybe I get to draw a card. That's great. It's going to be a big tempo play. It's going to have a big impact, but it's not quite as devastating in environments where the players are just waiting to put that big 7, 6, 8 drop, whatever, onto the battlefield. So I agree. I think this is a really nice modal spell. Again, I love spells that do multiple things. So I think it just works so nicely in this cube.
It's high cost, gives modal options, and it's not mana net positive. It has a lot of things that go well with
even that higher cost. 5 mana is really it's not a whole lot even in a vintage environment. And I say even though you've got access to a lot of fast mana, you can do a lot with 5 mana. There's a lot of very powerful things you can do. And Mystic Confluence is a great card, very powerful card. And again, I think it scales nicely when that power band is wider.
So from a drafter's point of view, it's important that you understand that I have the 5 different major factions as we've talked about. But then the overarching, I guess, the archetypes, 40,000 feet in the air, they're going to encompass things like self-mill, typal synergies, which would be kind of where those lords tie in, something like Champion of the Parish, or along those lines of
Goblin
some kind
King, even though it's not in
Goblin
this cube.
King. Yeah, David Bowie's always in this cube forever. Love me some David Bowie. But also we've got stuff like Hard Control, which is like your typical spells matters, counter burn. That's going to be in here because you don't have to run the factional creatures in order to be successful in this cube. You can do a spells matters and then support it slightly.
Yep.
Then we've got the aggro, which I think qualifies as the humans, the vampires, and I'm going to say devils because Hellrider's in here, and there's a few little splashy ones in here, but they're kind of one-offs. Then you've got a flashback spells matters type of group where you're intentionally trying to put stuff in your graveyard. You're doing delving, you're doing some delirium effects, stuff like that, but it's really not overly pushed. And then we have madness as a splashable with stuff like Angie, which will be Angie. You're going to do Angie. But madness is really cool, but it's very splashable and also cross-pollinates with some of the other archetype stuff like Reanimator and putting these flashback spells in your cube and then the discard, and there's payoffs for it. And then Reanimator. Those are kind of the overarching. And it is important to note that my Reanimator, I toned it back after the SEG Con incident where I had Reanimate in the cube, combined with Entomb, combined with Grave Titan, and it was like a turn 2 Grave Titan, and players weren't really happy about that. So I've toned back the Reanimator in this environment, paced it down by 2. So you're going to find stuff like Life, Death, etc.
I don't think in a thematic cube, which this definitely is. I think anytime you can get a Grave Titan into play on turn 2,
GG's.
I think you kind of need to look at the power level of what the rest of the cube can
Used to be a Grizzlebrand, if that makes you feel better.
It does not, but it does.
Well, so let me step it back to help everybody kind of get in that design space. This was the second cube after I built a powered vintage cube. So
that's why the Tudors are in there.
That is exactly why. You get so used to that type of high-paced, that fast and furious environment where everything is tutoring, everything's Path to Exiles and mana drains and all these, not Mox and Soul Rings. No, they never came here. But the gist is you get so used to turn 1, turn 2, turn 3 game, pack it up, play another one, that some of that found its way into this cube design in the early elements, and then they got weeded out over time. I felt like because Innistrad was, it was originally Avacyn versus Grizzlebrand as a kind of a top-level design, I put them in here, and Grizzlebrand was by far superior to any Avacyn they ever made at the time.
Right.
But after a while, I realized this has nothing to do with the Gothic horror theme I wanted to build. It was a strange design aspect. It was more of an Avacyn restored battlefield that I wanted to get out of the cube. So as the cube has evolved,
it was more magic. I almost want to say it was more. Now you're getting into more magic lore than you are the lore of your cube design.
You're exactly right. It wasn't my Gothic horror that I wanted to design. It was exactly what Wizards of the Coast was telling me belonged in the plane of Innistrad. Yep. And I felt like the players were looking for that. So I tried to put every remnant in there that made it feel like Innistrad. And that's what's interesting that cube curators can learn over time is, in the case of Cartographia, we talked about with John, he made his own plane.
He did.
Right? He's made his own plane. May has made her own plane. she won't let you call it Eldraine. She won't let you call it Lorwyn. She'll call it Elilorn.
No, I don't think I will.
But it's something as curators that you can be mindful of. You can do some world building. So that's kind of the meat and potatoes. You got some points here?
Well, I want to move on actually into. We talked a few episodes ago, about the psychologies of the players, right? We talked about the Spikes, we talked about the Jenny Johnnies, and so on and so forth. The Melvins, great band,
Vorthos.
the Melvins, the Vorthos. Let's talk a little bit about how you're satisfying the player types, right? Not just the creature types, but now you got to satisfy your player types. How are you doing that in each of these, not just the factions, but the color combinations and all that? Where was your sort of, because obviously, again, you talked about the high power in the early on. Now you've got to rearrange things. You've got to be much more cognizant of, now you're taking out a bunch of tutors, and now you've got to be much more organic in how the decks are being built. Now you've also got to think about, right, how are the drafters going to look at this, and how do I provide this experience? How do I make it fun? Where did you take it after, right, redesign, can't do this anymore, Grizzlebrand gone, DT gone, all this kind of stuff. Now you've got to redesign. Where did you take it from there? Because this is a long time ago, and now we're in 2023. You're about to take it to CubeCon. Tell us a bit about the different factions and the different themes and archetypes, and where you view them now, and where they've gone.
Yeah, so we'll start with typal. Typal is its design aspect, and this is my opinion, really plays into, as Spikes will learn and evolve, and they'll find the best deck and they'll play to it. We've talked about that. But it also plays, in my opinion, more into that Timmy aspect, because these are kind of, they follow that storytelling, that Vorthos lore, where they can build a deck and it's like, vampires, as we talked about,
so
or
is that,
werewolves.
Is that what you wanted for the Timmy play? As an example, right?
What I think naturally, organically evolved from this cube by providing that aspect, that a lot of the Innistrad stuff just kind of gave that to me as a freebie. I could check that box by playing these cards on that level. And we have Timmys and Tammys in our group.
Absolutely.
And they were quite pleased with that kind of, I like werewolves.
And I was going to say the werewolves as well.
It really just kind of appeased what they wanted to do there. And then I've got the burn spells and stuff. The one that was the most technically challenging was it's playing to the Ginnies and Johnnies. That's what I felt was the hardest thing to break out of that shell with a typal aspect, and that's why I've added these things to push that ceiling. And I've done that we'll kind of start with this. We've talked about this on previous episodes. It was the Commander Spell Book, the combo finder that we'll include in the show notes. And I run this for all my cubes now. And we'd say, go ahead and reference our good friend ChillMTG. Has a video on YouTube that'll also include in the show notes. That'll show you how to use this tool. But I've gotten quite into the habit now where I want to run this to see if I have a combo, and do I want this combo to exist, and how might I do this combo, or how might I run through this combo. May, do you have any combos in any of your cubes before we proceed? Or how do you feel about combos?
Yes, but not in the way that is as powerful as, say, your environment.
Yes. I want to do the technical ones within these unpowered, these lower powered environments. I don't want any of the Kiki Twin type stuff. For me, that's more of a powered vintage type environment. Whereas I want the mechanical type of combos where if you've put together 3 to 4, maybe even 5 pieces, you have done the thing and it's really cool and it's memory making. And you got to assemble it. As I mentioned, in this particular environment, there are no tutors. So you had to do this via cantrips, drawing, luck of the draw, who knows, right? The heart of the cards. Or you were just mechanically building up and defending and shielding yourself, which I'll explain that too, because we're going to start going into some technical builds, and this is very technical. And if you're going to do this thing, you need to be able to protect this thing. So when we talk about this combo, and there's only one within this cube, but it has a lot of variations, you need to be prepared to have your counter spells up, your hand stripping up, basically any disruption you have, or kill spells or board wipes, right? And this one in particular is going to weigh heavily, and this is not unknown to the community. It's going to be Phyrexian Altar. For 3 colorless, you get an artifact. Sacrifice a creature, add 1 mana of any color. And the way this combo is going to work, and I'm putting it out there for everyone to fight over this at the CubeCon tables, is Gravecrawler. And if you play Gravecrawler for one swamp, you get a creature zombie. Gravecrawler can't block. You may cast Gravecrawler from your graveyard as long as you control a zombie.
Give me some zombie token makers.
And then I've put in the show notes just a standard Phyrexian zombie that's really disturbing. I believe that's Phyrexian. It's probably the most disturbing one of all. Looks like it's from John Carpenter's The Thing. But you just need you just need the representation of an additional zombie, and you can begin to recast, sacrifice the Gravecrawler, make the 1 black mana, sacrifice the Gravecrawler, and loop this as long as you have another zombie present on the table.
So not a win by itself.
That is not a win. That is just an infinite goofy loop that you're just gonna you could stall time. They'll scream judge. So here's what's interesting, and we've got the traditional Blood Artist. You can talk about that all day, but May, would you like to cover some of these other interesting ones here?
So, an important thing to note about Johnny players is that Johnny players aren't only looking for the combos, and what's cool about your environment is that Johnny players can look for those engine pieces. And that is definitely an aspect that is good to consider whenever you're putting these decks and these archetypes together, is not just how are you going to appeal to the Johnny players via what are the stupid cards that we want to put together to live the dream, but also what is the group of cards that we can put together to make that value engine. And Johnnies are looking to do an interesting thing over time or in one go. And I think that you did a pretty good job in this environment. And when it comes to, say, your Blood Artist, which is your 1 and a black vampire, whenever it or another creature dies, target opponent loses 1 life, you gain 1 life. And then Torrens, which is Fist of the Angels, 1 green, 1 white, creature human cleric. It has training. Whenever you cast a creature card, create a 1/1 green and white human soldier token with training. And you also have things like Corpse Knight, which is just whenever another creature enters your control, each opponent loses 1 life. The point is, you're trying to go wide, you're trying to make tokens, and you're trying to make this engine part. And you have a lot of different avenues to create those tokens and build into that aristocrats part, and it makes the Johnny brain go burr. It takes a while to get to the point where you have Phyrexian Altar, Blood Artist, and the Gravecrawler, right? Even if you do have all 3, a majority of the time, whatever the deck's doing, the Johnny's trying to build that kind of token, aristocraties, whatever, if they're trying to go in that direction, and I think that that's cool.
So I wanted to do a little bit differently. So the Blood Artist effect and the Corpse Knight, and there's other variations of that. Those are the ones that are going to machine gun them, right? I mean, they're going to get pinged to death on the infinite loops. Where it's not as easy peasy as stuff like Torrens, where you could go infinite and make an infinite army of 1/1 green and white human soldiers, but then you're forced to say pass. So you're still open to wraths. I was really intentional in that. If you wanted to kind of do those loops, or you got Willet, the Rock Cleaver, whenever another zombie you control dies, if it didn't have Decayed, create a 2/2 black zombie token with Decayed. So you can kind of just do some weird loopy nonsense there.
My point is that these cards are good for the engine,
they're
but
engines.
can come together for the combo. That was the point that I was making.
Exactly. And it really ties in. And here's one. You want to get super spice with this? You want to like next level spice? I'm looking for I want somebody to yell. You know, you got J-Bro yelling all over CubeCon. If someone does this, I want to hear him shout. So you do the Gravecrawler loop with the Phyrexian Altar. And once you've done it enough times, I want to see that somebody flashes in Liliana Standard Bearer for 2 colorless and 1 swamp. You get a 3/1 flash. When Liliana Standard Bearer enters the battlefield, draw X cards, where X is the number of creatures that died this turn under your control, and have a Labman or Jace, Wielder of Mysteries, on the board.
I was just going to say,
and then scream.
Is there by any chance some kind of self-mill
that is insanity
strategy in there?
So
as well?
It's important to point this out. So I just did this whole combo architecture, right? That also splintered off to infinite tokens, but they didn't necessarily attack you unless you had a sack outlet. And the other one is you got pinged to death because you just so happened to be not lucky enough to kill that Blood Artist or that aristocrat. Or the Liliana Standard Bearer now goes over into the self-mill. So as I'm trying to build these, I don't want them to be linear, and I want them to touch multiple points within these archetypes so that the players feel like they have divergent options, right? That's very important to break away from just the purely typal. Do you have any thoughts on that?
Yeah, I like the fact, first of all, that you've got so many different and interesting payoffs for some of these, right? And they are good cards. I mean, look at
They're
Blood
standalone.
Artist.
That's
Blood
important.
Artist is a good card by itself. You don't need all these extra pieces to go along with it. Yeah, it's wonderful when you can assemble a 3, 4, 5 card combo, whatever the case may be, but it's always fun to have pieces like that. And I agree 100% with what May said, right? You're looking, as a Spike player, when you're looking to min-max, you're trying to go hard on it. You're looking for those pieces, those enabler pieces, right? And those cards, they are enablers, don't get me wrong, but you've also got the opportunity to branch out into different strategies or also just play them as good stuff pieces, which sometimes you just need regardless of whatever strategy you're building towards. That's a fairly straightforward one as well, right? The Gravecaller and casting it infinitely and getting all those triggers. It's a well-known one. It's a good signpost for the cube as well, right? And that's another thing that I think things like that are great for, is if you're sitting down and drafting this cube and you've never looked at the overview or you're not familiar with the list, seeing those kind of things always to me acts as a great signpost, and someone who is looking for those min-max, like real high level technical kind of combos is going to see that and think, okay, this is awesome. I get the chance to build a technical deck, and it really does expand the scope of what you're looking for when you're drafting.
And so it's also important that the individual components within these combos, they're standalone. They are not dead cards in the water. You're quite all right having a Phyrexian Altar in your Aristocrats deck, or for that matter, any deck, just to gain a lot of mana to continue to move. Someone board wipes you or removes your stuff, you just sack them in response, and you start producing mana to cast the next thing. I mean, it gives you a lot of avenues. That's important as a curator to make sure that your individual pieces, the best you can, aren't so pointing at one linear line of play. This is all I can do, right? I'm Helm of the Host, and I can only do the Helm of the Host thing. And this is all you get out of me, right? Because it'll become a dead card in a draft as it goes around the table. Yeah. So I'm really choice in these cards. Even like Liliana Standard Bearer, you're quite okay with flashing that in after they've removed one of your creatures, just to ensure that you now draw a card, because that many died.
It's still a 3-1.
Replaces itself in so many words.
It's still a 3-1.
I see you, Wrath the God. Too bad.
Too bad. I'm going to draw a lot of cards. So that's important, and that's a good way of spicing up these typal. I mean, I don't care if, like I said, if you're doing goblins or dwarves or whatever, merfolk, you can always find ways to make some more spice so they don't feel so linear, so encapsulated, so that your drafters have opportunities. As Maya said a billion times, we need to get a t-shirt that says May says aha, right? Because the aha moment is very important for players, and they want to find these neat things, and you don't have to feel like you're on rails. And, just playing werewolves, green, red. And let's talk about the werewolves. So
they were terrible.
They were terrible.
They were absolutely unplayable.
So unplayable that I took the challenge to say, you know what, I'm going to fix them. And I want to talk about that for a moment. And I'm going to say something that's okay for you to do as a curator is color imbalance. How did I fix the problem with the werewolves? I increased the density of the werewolves. And I was fortunate enough to get some better werewolves with, I guess it wasn't Midnight Hunt, which was weird. It was the one before that. We had these two odd Innistrad sets that came out back to back. But one of them was the vampire one, and had more werewolves. And the one with werewolves had more vampires. It was very confusing. But anywho, the point is that we got a few gifts in there. I was able to get a real werewolf lord. Would you mind taking this one away, May? I think this one might make you happy.
Tovalar, Dire Overlord. Hilarious. One red and a green for a legendary creature human werewolf for 3/3. And whenever a wolf or werewolf you control deals combat damage to a player, you draw a card. Pretty great. At the beginning of your upkeep, if you control 3 or more wolves and or werewolves, it becomes night, and then you transform any number of human werewolves you control. And it has daybound, which is a whole mechanic that I'm not going to explain. But the werewolf side is where whenever a wolf or werewolf you control deals combat damage, you draw a card, of course. But you can also pay X red and a green. Target wolf or werewolf gets +X+O and trample until end of turn.
So it's effectively a Kessig Wolf Run is what you get on a card.
Yeah.
And I have Kessig Wolf Run in this cube. So I've done everything I can at this point, and we have had numerous play tests. And werewolves
are innately stompy.
They have become a real mid-range threat at this point, right? And they were kind of checking. I know these are in the 3-drop slot as we were talking about, but surprisingly, they kind of get a little bit more beefier, and they really represent that mid-range aspect. Whereas I see the humans and the vampires, specifically the humans, pressing that aggro pretty hard. And then the vampires are kind of stand back, control, aristocratic with some exceptions. But you'll see that your ghoul, your werewolves do quite well. And I have observed, if you're willing to do a little bit of like go into some Jund or go into Rug, these perform exceptionally well. A little bit of counter magic, a little bit of on-spot removal, and you got a serious army going on here. I do recommend. I would have never recommended this probably a year and a half ago for someone to play this with the expectation of winning at CubeCon. Now I'm telling you that the werewolves do represent a serious threat. And I do have the day-night tokens that I will provide so that you can track it. It is important. That is, we're not going to go into the whole aspect. It is important that you never stop tracking the day-night even after your creature dies, because when you cast another one, that's where you're going to be on that day-night. And the judges will help you with that, I imagine, or they'll just be really upset.
I hope so.
We'll find out what happens. This next one is a darling of mine. I absolutely love this card. And it was how I beefed up the Werewolves Part 2. I added 2 Arlens. And in this case, I'm showing Arlen Cord for 2 colorless and Gruul. You get a Planeswalker Arlen, and it's 3 loyalty, +1 until end of the turn. One of you, up to 1 target creature gets +2/+2 and gains vigilance and haste. And then 0, you put a 2/2 green wolf creature token onto the battlefield, transform Arlen Cord. And the other side is Arlen Embraced by the Moon, Planeswalker Arlen. +1, creatures you control get +1/+1 and gain trample until the end of the turn, -1, and I like this one the best. Arlen Embraced by the Moon deals 3 damage to target creature or player, any target essentially. Transform Arlen Embraced to the Moon, so it flips back over. So you can kind of just keep this one maneuvering back. It's a very dynamic card. It's kind of fun. It's going to tear my sleeves to pieces. And then it also has a -6 on the secondary side. You get an emblem with creatures you control have haste, and tap. This creature deals damage equal to its power to target creature or player. That is a GG's. If you ultimate that, good luck. But it's really neat. Most of the play patterns of this is going to be make the wolf, flip it over, hit them for 3, bolt them, flip it back over, make a wolf. And that's kind of the play patterns that traditionally come out of this until you're ready to actually do some kind of overrun effect or whatever. But it's pretty neat. I like this card.
I like this card too. I think it's a good, forces you to make decisions, forces you to really evaluate the board state and the cards in your opponent's hand and your life total and the whole 9 yards. So very prototypical, mid-rangey, going towards the aggro side of things. And it is a fun card. I will say that I think Werewolves is still in a little bit of a rough state in the cube. I think that overall, I don't know if this pushes the green-red specifically. I think that green-red is in a much better place, but I think of the color pairs, I still think green-red struggles a little bit more than some of the other color pairs. But I think it does a heck of a job in leveling up the playing field a little bit.
Yeah, I think the beatdown is there. Just haven't got to see it. I was watching people do it. And I added stuff like Uvenwall Oddity and things that were really not in the werewolves, but stuff to really push this next level.
Yeah.
So that was kind of the reason why I included this in the difficult is because it's werewolves. And frankly, they just have been difficult to balance as a curator. But I'm trying to give people hope at CubeCon to let them know that this, in my opinion, is a very strong faction now and worthy of at least giving it a go. I think you'll have a good time. Players that play it generally are having fun. But now let's move into some additional difficult strategies. We could keep doing the typal stuff all day, right? And I think that really appeases the spikes and the Timmy Tammies. But I really when I was writing this script, I'm like, how do I get this typal thing to not be just going on that? I want to really appease those. I like the Johnny Jenny aspect. That's where my brain's at. As I said in these design elements, we've kind of talked about just from the top level down, we've talked about the breakdown where I felt like the individual creatures satisfied, in my opinion, a lot of the basic Timmy Tammy expectations as far as the Vorthos and the creature design build aspects of it and what they do specifically from our players. The Gruul Werewolves really did the thing, right? It's when we got into the more difficulties of a typal build to get into those Jenny Johnny mechanical build aspects, right?
Sure.
It's easy to do a mechanical build, for instance, in Uberbear's Artifact Cube, where stuff like modular exists and these components that kind of just do that thing anyways. It's a lot harder when it's a creature-based subgroup of vampires that they're really on rails doing the I am an aristocrat, and
Well, the creature
I'm looking for a
types-
lord.
Yeah, the creature types are
Certain
more
ones
so,
play to it. Yeah.
Yeah, that's kind of been the focus of the cube for a while, right? It's not a strategy or type or archetype kind of cube. It is, but that's kind of secondary to the types, right?
The types.
It's got to remain a gothic horror, like you said. It's got to remain that you've got the werewolves and the zombies and all that kind of stuff. So that being the focus and having to be the primary focus is going to obviously make all the secondary stuff a little bit more difficult.
Yeah, they even categorized it for CubeCon Vorthos versus they categorize the artifact cube a mechanical build, right? It's a very Jenny Johnny aspect. So how do I bring those aspects in here? We're going to continue down that path now. I put in some other paths that a Jenny Johnny player, someone that wants to do a technical build that requires setup and takes time, strategy to build these components, but they're very powerful in combination with one another, much like we talked about the Phyrexian altar loop. These are other ones as well. May, would you mind taking on this first one in the group, please?
Gladly, considering how much I love this card. It's spider spawning.
I can't even look at the card.
Those of you who've been in the cube community long enough know about this card. It's 4 and a green sorcery. Put a 1/2 green spider creature token on it with reach onto the battlefield for each creature in your graveyard. It also has flashback for 6 and a black. Love this card.
Yeah, I'm a huge fan of this card because it plays into the self-mill strategy. It plays into Reanimator and I Just Don't Care, or any of those, like, you just got to ditch a card to something like, for instance, Faithless Looting. You just get rid of this card. You don't care. You can reward yourself later for 6 colorless and 1 black, and you can flash it back then. So it's just a great card on rate. Does the thing, and it does shut down. It countermans the spirits that Stu talked about. Those are kind of essentially your Air Force in the cube.
No, it doesn't.
And these are great.
Not even close. Not even close.
I think it's just a separate payoff.
Absolutely, absolutely.
One of the things that I love about spider spawning, again, like you say, this fits so nicely in the archetype that we're going to go into next. But it fits everything. It fits the self-mill. It can fit the aggro. It can fit so many different archetypes within the cube. This, to me, and it's 2 colors, which is kind of gravy for me, right? Because if it was 4 and a green and then 6 and a green to flash it back, okay, it's in 1 color, that's cool. But I think the fact that it's that 2 colors and it just creates that connection between those archetypes is why this, to me, if you were to ask me for a number, 5 top, the top 5 defining cards of this cube, spider spawning would be one of them.
Well, thank you.
It's a classic limited card.
It is
It's
such a great
fantastic.
card.
I love it. But I think it really ties in like gel here with this next card that Stu is dying to talk about.
So this is a favorite of mine. This is such a notorious constructed card, and it's Hogarth Arisen Necropolis. For 5 colorless and Golgari. You get a legendary creature avatar 8/8. You can't spend mana to cast this spell. It has Convoke and Delve. You may also cast Hogarth Arisen Necropolis from your graveyard, and it has Trample. Did I mention that it's an 8/8 Trample?
Yes.
So why I love this card, and for anyone who's been following Magic for longer than 5 minutes or who follows constructed formats, will kind of remember this as being a card that was so notorious in Modern, because you can kind of see Wizards of the Coast and the designers, and they're thinking, you know what, it's 7 mana for an 8/8 Trample. That's pretty strong, but you can't spend mana, right? That's such a major drawback, right? Because having to delve and convoke, like, yeah, you can cast it from your graveyard, but you've delved away all those cards from your graveyard, and yeah, you've convoked, but surely the cards, like the creature cards, they've gone to your graveyard and you've delved them away. Like, it's going to be so hard to even get this card out, let alone get repeated value. Surely no one will be able to break this card. 5 minutes.
Oh, they're sweet,
later.
blessed innocence.
Oh, my sweet summer child. Well, this card got broken, like, literally out of the box. It got banned in Modern immediately. It was played in, I think, Legacy. It was certainly played. It's just such an entertaining card. And the reason why I say it's an entertaining card is because the last time I drafted this was not in your cube. It was with our good friend Samich, aka Chris Moore's Sultai combo cube. And this was in my first pack. I don't even know if it was the most powerful card in the pack. It probably was, because it's Hogarth. But the first time I saw this card, I picked it. The rest of my deck is built around this card. I am going to have fun with this draft regardless, it doesn't really matter how bad the other cards are in a vacuum. If they are any kind of enabler for a card that is so completely broken as Hogak is, I'm going to enjoy playing it.
One thing that's cool about Hogak is that limited is a different beast than constructed. And when you are building your decks and you're trying to draft into these lanes, Hogak comes up, it can overlap with a lot of the strategies that tend to pop up, like discard and mill and whatnot. But also, if you have a bunch of tokens, you can just convoke. And the fact that could be a really good payoff for a lot of those decks, but it lacks the consistency that constructed has. And I will note that that is a very, very important note, because when you're drafting this cube, this can end up in a lot of different strategies. It's a great card. It's a very powerful card, but you're not going to have the consistency to constantly bring it out. But when you do, it's going to feel great.
I would agree with that totally. And also, I do not offer any. I've cut lightning greaves. There's no protections, and there's very few haste enablers. There's no anger that you're going to put in your graveyard to make this keep looping out, right? So it does take work, but I think it's interesting and it's technical enough, but also it plays into, I want to do Reanimator, I want to do some self-mill, and I want to do Hogak. It's okay that you can make all three of those work together. I mean, you can run this in a lab man strategy and come out okay on the other end, just making it work, right? Literally.
Stu just slowly backing away.
And then we run into one of my favorites that May and I told John to add to Cartographia, and Stu said, immediately put it on a watch list after he said, do it. It's Living Death. This is another build-up, fantastic interactive card that I think it really encourages people to make a decision. And for 3 colorless and 2 black, you get a sorcery. Each player exiles all creature cards from their graveyard, then sacrifices all the creatures they control, then put all the cards they exiled this way onto the battlefield. What's so interesting about in this environment, and also we talked about in our good friend Chris's Graveyard Synergy Cube, is there's a cost to this because your opponent very likely has a really stacked graveyard too. So it has to be very calculated. You have to decide when this is advantageous to you, and you can break that synergy. So I think it's really important. I think it's a great card, great build-up card. It's a high cost, but it's got a big payoff, and it's big splashy plays, kind of like Hogak and Spider Spawning. And it really rewards those Jenny Johnny, I want to build an engine, I want to do a thing. It's very satisfying, and it's a great thing to have in typal environments to allow your environments to be more robust outside of just the on-rails, I do the thing that the Goblin does, for example. May, do you have a thought on that?
Yes, I do have a thought. I think that it is definitely a lot more of a Timmy Tammy card, because it's the big splashy play that, oh, that's a nice board you have. It's my turn for the big board. Haha, big spell.
I think one of the reasons why I love this card is because it's fun. It's so much fun. Like, Living Death is a fun card. Any kind of effect like that has a big, massive, dramatic, like, oh my gosh, what's going on here? This is the kind of card that if you're drafting in a room and there's a bunch of other people kind of milling around, checking out what's going on, if someone casts Living Death, I'm going to be like, oh, someone's got a Living Death. What's going to happen? You're going to know what's on the battlefield.
You know why you're going to know? This is why it's going to happen. Because you hear somebody go, Judge! Because the ETBs get pretty spicy whenever you start playing this stuff. It's all about the round of priority on this one. It's interesting. But May, I cannot take this next card away from you. This one's another setup, but I love this card. Love it.
Yes. Bringing me in for the vampire, as you should. Olivia, the Crimson Bride, 4 black and a red, legendary vampire noble. And she is a 3/4 with flying and haste. Whenever she attacks, return target creature card from your graveyard to the battlefield, tapped and attacking. It gains. When you don't control a legendary vampire, exile this creature. Big, dumb, splashy, turn sideways, reanimate something in Rakdos feels pretty good. And no matter what you're choosing, whether it's the discard, self-mill, etc., you're going to end up with something on that turn 6. I can count. Yes.
I love that there's no restriction on this. This is one of the things that makes this card so bonkers. It's return target creature card. It's not 3 CMC or less. There's nothing like that. It's just get a creature card, put it onto the battlefield. It's tapped and attacking. yeah, it kind of sucks. Oh no, I have to have a legendary vampire to keep control of this creature. Oh no, but
To be fair, when this is hitting the board, the game's probably
the game's
over
probably
at that point,
over.
So...
Would you? That's an interesting point.
You need to kill Olivia is what you do. I do not provide ways to protect her.
Is it Win Mori?
No, I made it...
And not Win Mori Povich, but is this a little Win Mori?
It could have been Olivia Mobilized for War, which really played into Madness as well. I chose to put this in for the big splash, the kind of...
I like this one more.
I like this one more just because the gown alone...
Where's the greatest Olivia that's ever been printed, though?
Oh, I couldn't tell you if I wanted to. I think Olivia Mobilized for War is probably the most technical, really plays into Madness. And
But
does
what
a lot
about the
more.
Olivia with the greatest name and just the greatest art and everything?
Oh, you want to talk about her?
I want to talk about Olivia Voldaren. Where's she at?
She's not in this cube. She's
I know.
A little too slow.
I'm sad.
She was in an early iteration, so I have to choose my Olivias. That's another thing
You should
that
never
I
have
do.
to... Look, listen to me. Okay, I love you. I love drafting your cubes, but please don't ever make me choose my Olivia.
She's married
okay?
now.
I'm coming for you, Edgar.
So we've kind of covered, those are some technical aspects. But let's get even more adventurous in the technical, right? And it's going to be the self-mill. This is going to be the hardest deck to make happen and the one that somebody will stand up and go, I did the thing, right?
Let me ask you why, all right? And the reason why I think this is so important because self-mill is a strategy that I will say this, it's an unnatural feeling strategy in Magic. Magic being a very attrition, very resource-based game, right? Where everything from the cards in your hand and the cards in the library and the cards in your graveyard are resources, but kind of dumping cards in. And I will say this as when I was a new player, right? Nowadays, I'm like, I love the graveyard and I love putting things in the graveyard for lots of strategies and decks that I've built and decks that I play. But it almost felt originally like, why would I want that? But players that are strong Magic players, players that are experienced players will be very familiar with anything that not just as an enabler, but rewards you for putting creature cards into the graveyard. Tell us about where this lands, because, I mean, you just said it's one of the more technical, but is it the most technical? Would you say that it's the most technical? And why this? Like, why self-mill? Like, what was the motivation behind putting this in as one of the more advanced strategies in this cube?
Originally, we had mill in the cube, and it was almost too easy, at least the pieces that I provided to the players. And we talked about this in I guess it was our Nose to the Millstone episode. I think May and I had a discussion on why we liked mill versus self-mill in our different environments. I wanted to push this because it correlated very nicely with Reanimator. It hit some of the flashback components like the spider spawnings, and putting those pieces into your graveyard were quite all right for setting up later for your necromancies, etc. But when I'm defining self-mill, I'm specifically referring to, and for the sake of time, it will be Laboratory Maniac and Jace, Wielder of Mysteries. And there will be no Thassa's Oracle in this cube.
Boo.
It was at one point. It was too easy to accomplish, frankly, in the environment.
I get that.
It was just too clean. But Laboratory Maniac for those, and they're both going to have a similar effect, and we have read these in previous... Look at the show notes. Look at Scryfall.
Labman's pretty
But
famous.
Labman is, if you would draw a card while your library has no cards in it, you win the game. Jace is going to have an iteration of that as well, right? So how do you push this strategy a little further? You want to get weirdly technical?
Yes.
How do I make these cross-pollinate with something like Aristocrats? May, would you mind taking on this one here? I'm going to do self-mill, but I'm also doing Aristocrats. Well, how can you possibly make that happen?
I appreciate that you're hoisting the Eldring card at me.
Yep.
Sir Conrad the Grim is a 3/black legendary creature human knight, 5/4. Whenever another creature dies or a creature is put into a graveyard from anywhere other than the battlefield, or a creature card leaves your graveyard, it deals 1 damage to each opponent, but it also has 1 and a black. Each player mills a card. And repeatable, each player mills a card and with the potential to deal 1 damage. It feels pretty good on its own. It overlaps with the Aristocrat strategy just by itself. But I will also add that it punishes the Aristocrat strategy and punishes the self-mill deck.
Yep, it does. Which is interesting. You got to make a decision here, right? And I got the sick Secret Lair art recently. And it's next level. It's Sir Conrad, but he's been going to Planet Fitness and not on Pizza Day. It's pretty great. But
He's got a zombie horse.
He
right
does
there.
have a zombie horse
got a
with
zombie
a
horse.
flaming skull face in his hands.
It's pretty awesome.
It is pretty amazing. Like, if I was going to get a tattoo, this would be the tattoo. But here's where it gets even more interesting. Let's do that cross-pollination, Sue. You love some spirits.
I do.
But how do you make spirits in a self-mill?
So you use Mirror Mad Phantasm, 3 colorless and 2 blue for a creature spirit. It's a 5/1 flying, and it has this activated ability for 1 colorless and a blue. Mirror Mad Phantasm's owner shovels it into their library. If that player does, they reveal cards from the top of that library until a card named Mirror Mad Phantasm is revealed. That player puts that card onto the battlefield, and all other cards revealed this way into their graveyard.
Yep.
That is a word soupy kind of card.
And it's really technical and hard to hit and inconsistent, but also fun. And what I wanted to do is put cards in here that aren't trappy. So you're trying to do the self-mill, right? And you got this, oh man, I got this Mirror Mad Phantasm. I don't know what to do with it, but I got a lot of spirits, and I have a Spirit Lord. Oh, well, whatever. It's going to be the top out. It's going to be a 5-drop for a 5/1, and I'm going to have a Spirit Lord. So now I got a 6/2, and I'm quite okay with that because that's flying. I'm looking at these cards from the cross-pollination standpoint so that players aren't on rails. Very important with typal design because you want to give people outs if people are getting, if the lanes are drying up during the draft when they're going around and someone's named Stu is taking all the Azorius spirits, you're willing to fall back on the fact that, I'm going to go to this self-mill strategy.
I'm willing to fall back on the fact that when I'm drafting spirits, I've got a 5-mana 5/1 flyer. And I'm probably beaten face with that card. And
Yes.
I love the self-mill strategy. It's awesome. But again, going into this cross-pollination, a 5-power flyer, even with only 1 toughness, is still a little bit of a pain in the butt to deal with.
I will note what's cool about this card is the fact that, and this is not obvious on first read, is the fact that it technically dodges removal. And that is important to keep in mind, is that, I'm going to try to remove it. No, I'm just going to pay 1 in a blue, send it back to the library, mill that many cards until it comes back on the board.
Yep. And you're setting up your Hogak. I mean, that's what you're doing here. These cards all just
I don't
blend
need
together.
Hogak.
Or your Spider
You're
Spawning.
already at 3 life.
Yep.
I've slammed you with spirits and spirit lords. I'm all good.
Whack.
Whack. So we've kind of talked about the technical, right? These are some very technical designs within this environment. For those drafters at CubeCon that really want to push the envelope, there's a lot more to be had in here. I mean, you can do a lot of things, and you don't have to worry about getting trapped or stuck. Even if the lane dries up, there's another way to go, right? And that was one of my design aspects of this environment. But let's go into the people who love the humans. They want to play it safe. They want to be that scorned villager. They want to be the one we talked about in a previous episode.
They want a champion.
They want a champion.
humans.
And what champion might that be? We talked about it previously. And it's not Champion of the Parish. But plays so well with.
So, is it Champion of Lambholts? That's the other one we were talking
It's
about.
Adeline.
All right, fine. It's Adeline. Resplendent Cathar, 1 colorless, 2 white for a legendary creature human knight. It's an star or X4 with vigilance. Adeline Resplendent Cathar's power is equal to the number of creatures you control whenever you attack. For each opponent, create a 1/1 white human creature token that's tapped and attacking that player or planeswalker they control. Very strong card. Very cool art.
Pairs well with Champion of the Parish. That's what May was talking about. The value unfolds itself.
I was going to say, it pairs extremely well. And as, again, May mentioned about the fact that there's such a monstrous density of humans within Magic, right? And your cube has tons and tons of humans. This, to me, is another one of those cards that can act as both a signpost card for something very straightforward, like I want to draft white or humans, some kind of white X deck or some kind of human oriented deck, and I want to just slap face with it, because you can get very, very aggro with Adeline. You've also got the option to create a bunch of tokens, right? And that can work great with an aristocrat strategy, right? So you've got, again, another card that really does epitomize this cube, right? And Adeline is a very, very, very powerful card. It's, I would say you could almost pick one, pack one, Adeline, depending on what you're feeling that day. And I love that there's these cards that exist in the cube. And again, this is absolutely one of my most favorite cubes to draft out of all the cubes that you have. I love signpost cards. I love high power cards that don't just fit into one strategy, that give you the option to branch out, even, halfway through pack 2 when you're thinking, okay, I've kind of thought I've been drafting some kind of aggro deck, but now all of a sudden I've got these other avenues that are opening up because maybe I didn't get the aggro cards that I was thinking, and I picked up other cool effects that I thought might fit in with this card, and I've maybe picked up some fixing as well. And now all of a sudden I've got an avenue that is not aggro, but Adeline is just so perfect for, and the decks they don't build themselves. This is something else. The decks don't build themselves. The decks have to be so carefully drafted when you're looking at each pack. Every time someone passes you, 15 cards, 14 cards, 13 cards, whatever, you've got to be so careful. Again, because of the high power level, but there's so many options available. And especially with cards like that, again, that are not just a signpost for a singular strategy. They just open doors for so many options. And Adeline, again, is just one of those cards that really exemplifies the fluidity with the
cross-pollination between the archetypes, right? I see what you're trying to get at. Yeah.
Exactly.
May, do you have something you wish to add?
Yes. I just wanted to note that when I was talking about the 3 drops earlier, this was one of the 3 drops that I had in mind that I was saving because it's later in the script. But you as a drafter, the listener, you, the one who's listening, when you are drafting this cube, keep in mind that Adeline is going to be running around, and whether or not it's going to be in that white weenie aggro deck or in that humans deck, that she may come up or you're going to draft it. And when you are expecting those powerful 3 drops to come up, just kind of keep that in mind. And when you have something that's able to make humans every turn, it's just good. It's just a good card. It's good value, as Stu's mentioned.
Yeah, and May, this again, talk a bit more about this power band, because this is like a big thing for you. And again, I look at the horror cube and I look at the Fey cube and I see more similarities, I would say, between the Fey cube and the horror cube than probably any other cube. And obviously, May, your Fey cube is much, is kind of typal, and this is a typal kind of cube, right? Mm-hmm. Tell me about the power band of this cube and how this sort of fits in with some of the strategies that you've thought about when you're either designing your cube or even just looking at other cubes. I mean, obviously you're kind of well known in the cube community. How does this sort of fit in on that power band discussion with this cube and how you see other cubes as well?
So when I'm looking at this cube, obviously not the one who designed it, so I'm not the most well-versed on what the exact power band is, just in a very literal sense, but just looking at it at a glance is that there's a big difference between our top-end cards like Hogak, like Olivia, etc., where we have these big, splashy, Living End's another great example, big, splashy win cards that will take over the game, and it's a very clear line of, at this turn, you are going to be in either a game-winning position or you're going to be in a position where you'll eventually win the game. And when you're looking at the power band, you're looking at what is going to be the weakest end of your options at that turn compared to the strongest options in that turn. And the reason why I mentioned the 3 drops so heavily in this instant is because a lot of those 3 drops are powerful, and the difference between those 3 drops is very balanced in a way that might not be obvious when you're actually drafting it. So I'll be very specific, say Welcoming Vampire is a very different beast than Adeline, right? They're both good cards, but Adeline gets you closer to getting to a game-winning state than Welcoming Vampire just kind of gets you more value, so that way when you get to that stronger card, that gets you to the winning state. And when you're looking at the power band just within white, it's easy to look at these 3 drops and consider how soon am I wanting to play my threat versus how soon am I wanting to force my opponents to interact with the said threat. The thing as curators that we have to keep in mind is when archetypes are going to start doing their thing and how easily it can get to the point to do the thing. And while there are a lot of similar strategies when it comes to drafting compared to the Fey Cube, the difference is that a lot of the Fey Cube cards, they're going to start around turn 4, turn 6, etc., because it's a slower environment, versus here, a lot of those 3 drops and whatever are going to be a lot scarier. And when you're curating the environment, it is something that we can keep in mind.
Yeah. So Anthony mentioned a little bit ago about my love for spirits, and he's absolutely right. I love spirits. And the reason why is because, as I mentioned earlier, one of my absolutely most dominant decks that I've ever drafted was in this cube, and it was a very, very heavy Azorius. I don't even know how much I splashed outside of white-blue. That 3-mana power band that you're talking about, right? So you can go look at the cube list, and we've got it in the show notes, and we can, post it in the chats, right? So when you look through, we've got the 46 cards in all the colors except for black that has 59. And then you've got your multicolored cards. And then you look at the 3 cards that are in the Azorius colors, and they are Drogskull Captain, Soul Herder, and Spell Queller. Those 3, I cannot even explain how absolutely steamroll those 3 cards were. Like, I didn't need to go to 4 or 5 or 6 mana. All I needed to do was get to that 3-mana power band and be able to drop one of those. Any one of those, I won a game literally by just dumping my hand out in the first couple of turns. And it was against our very, very good friend Kevin, who just got married recently and hasn't played Magic for a long time. But he had assembled a little bit of a board. I've got some spirits, and I think it was turn 5, maybe even turn 4. But he tried a bit of a flashy play. Spell Queller comes down, I swing, game's over. And he just looked at me, and he couldn't believe that I'd won so quickly with this typal deck in a cube that's not like a vintage cube. Like, you're expecting it. If someone's like, okay, forest, channel, Emrakul. Okay, I expect to lose that quickly when someone gets a start like that. I didn't do anything too crazy. I just hit one of my very, very powerful Azorius 3-drop spirits. And in the previous turns, I just played my other on-curve spirits. And this is why I'm still going to recommend it. If you draft spirits, you're going to be in for a good time.
I want to address Drogskull Captain. It has 1 colorless and Azorius. You get a creature spirit, 2/2 flying. Other spirit creatures you control get +1/+1 and have hexproof. This is the only card in the entire cube that does the hexproof, to the best of my knowledge, unless I've missed something. But this card in particular is a fantastic lord. But it says keyword other. And the reason why I allowed this one to exist is because removal density, because of creature density, is quite heavy. The ways I've got the Path to Exiles, I've got...
And let's just state, right, go back to, let's look at one of my other absolute all-stars in that deck, is Rattle Chains, 1 colorless, 1 blue, for a flash flying spirit. When it enters the battlefield, target spirit gains hexproof until end of turn. And I may cast spirit spells as though they had flash.
Yes. It's a singular turn, so it's kind of like...
it's pretty strong.
Yeah, but it gives you, what I'm looking for, temporary hexproof. It's kind of like Snakeskin Veil or something along those lines.
Exactly.
It gives you... I don't want stuff to be impervious to damage. I want stuff to have interaction. Interaction is key to this,
but I'm
right?
Really gonna
and vulnerability is key to cube design, in my opinion.
I'm going to feel terrible for someone if they used their 1 or 2 of their removal spells to try and get rid of my Drogskull Captain, and
they must.
in a Rattle Chains. They must.
Yeah.
They absolutely must. And this is where sort of the power band, and I love that term so much. This faction, this type, is incredibly powerful.
And it's going to be contested because it rules the sky.
It is.
With a few exception of a few vampires.
On that, it wasn't that first time that I drafted it. And I expected it to be, because I thought, okay, I think spirits are kind of a known entity, right? There's so many powerful effects that they have. Spell Queller especially is just a very, very, very powerful card. Soul Herder is also a very powerful card. This was definitely an environment, or definitely a deck that I drafted where I didn't need another color. I didn't need to do anything else. I just needed to draft spirits. The reason why I'm saying all this about the spirits is because I really don't think this is a bad thing. To have the ability to just draft hard on one type of creature and just be able to go nuts with it. Do I think that spirits were particularly powerful in this instance? Yeah. And Anthony, you just pulled up. So Occult Epiphany, X and a blue for an instant. Draw X cards, then discard X cards. Create a 1/1 spirit creature token, a white spirit creature token with flying for each card type among cards discarded this way. Like, there's so many wonderful and fun and powerful cards with the spirit type that are in this cube.
An occult epiphany, though, what I like about this card is I was letting him do it does self-mill. It plays into Reanimator. It ties into some madness. It lets you get the spirits that Stu is just dying for, right? And it draws you cards. So it's got a lot going on for this card. It's very powerful. And I wanted to kind of do this as taking the tie that binds, bringing these various typal archetypes and folding them together. That's really important.
So now I need my Men in Black, little eye shiner, to anyone who listens to this before CubeCon 2023. Spirits are terrible. Please don't draft them.
May has a thought.
I'm going to just add a very quick note because sake of time. But when it comes to the spirits in this environment, it makes perfect sense that Azorius, the control color, having a bunch of evasive bodies and then ways to interact with your opponent and prevent them from dealing with your stuff is obviously going to be strong in this environment. And sometimes it's okay to just have a stronger archetype and understand that some archetypes are going to be stronger than others, and that might affect that you're drafting when you are playing this cube at CubeCon. So when you're looking at the spirit decks, it's also important to remember that there are things like Lingering Souls in here and Spectral Procession and whatnot, of things that are just already generically playable. But once you get these really good lords in here, then you can really take over the game with those spirits. So keep an eye out for those when you're drafting it.
I've never got a chance. We've drafted this a bunch of times since that fateful day back when I went 3061, I think it was, with that deck. I've never once been able to get spirits by myself. They work very, very well in other archetypes. They work very, very well by themselves. I think they're super fun.
Absolutely. So we're going to kind of move over
to... But so are werewolves, Anthony.
Werewolves are I'm telling you right now, CubeCon 2023, and werewolves are going to dominate. Yeah, I've worked so hard on the werewolves, make them work. Final thoughts. So winning... You'll want to look for linchpins. The tie the archetypes together, synergies truly do matter. If you want to do the pairings of two, that works too. But if you want to next level the deck and really have some interaction and some key plays, consider splashing. Another thing that I would advise players is draft, at least sideboard, mass board wipes. There's a few in here. They're pretty important, and it's really key to take a hold of those.
I agree. And I'm going to dip in a little bit to these final thoughts. And maybe there's an opportunity for some prey upon effects for the werewolves.
They do exist.
Maybe there's an opportunity for some more prey upon effects.
There's plenty.
I will also continue that note. And we have Beast Within in here, which, by the way, the art's fantastic in here. But in terms of it being a limited card compared to a lot of the other colors, wolves aren't interested in it. They really aren't. Giving your opponent a 3/3 is just rough.
Until they have a Gavany Township.
I would totally replace that with just a 1-cost prey pawn.
Yeah. I agree with that. And then don't be afraid to splash, to have the interaction, as we said. Go outside of that too. It's okay. Mono has one in here. You can do mono black, zombies, do the thing. It has 1 games. But 3 colors, 2 colors, it's kind of the sweet spot, right? And then I would recommend take enchantment and artifact removal just for your sideboard at the very least, because there's not a lot of either one of those, and there's also not a lot of the removal spells that deal with that type of situation. So if one sticks, you might be in trouble. And then my final piece of advice, kill the aristocrats immediately. Do not underestimate. Blood Artist, not so great, but it suddenly becomes amazing when someone sticks a Lingering Souls.
When someone's like, oh...
yeah.
I guess I'll just play this 0/1 Blood Artist because that's all I've got in my hand and I can't defend the board. You should kill that with fire. Kill that right now.
Absolutely. And I would like to close on a amazing quote by our good friend Stephen King, friend of the show, right?
Friend of the show. Thank you, Stephen.
Monsters are real. Ghosts are real too. They live inside of us. And sometimes they win.
They always win.
Stephen King.
They always win.
All right. Stu, would you mind taking us away to the socials? May, do you have another thought you'd like to add to the Stephen King quote?
No, I actually just have a completely off-topic one because I need to apologize for a previous episode. Because we mentioned it off screen, and I had just in case draft to kind of see what was going on. But for everybody who listened to the Fake Cube episode, I'm sorry in advance. The adventures and draft them heavily in the Fake Cube. I'm sorry in advance. Sorry.
Adventures.deck. Let's go.
I love an adventure, magical or otherwise. So
I love them.
There are no adventures
Now you can
in
go
the
with
horror
the
cube.
socials. Sorry.
All right. So, as always, thank you so much to all of our listeners. I would like to start out with some news about the MTG Cube drafting Facebook group over on the Meta platform over there, the Faces, the Facebooks. We have a new head admin over there in the form of my co-host here, Anthony Adams. And come over if you're not a Discord user and you're looking for a place to come and hang out and talk about Cube, then come check us out. We've got some cool conversation going on there. A lot of members on that group, actually, Anthony,
It's
right?
about 700 members.
That's a lot of people.
It's pretty nice. Yeah, so it's great conversations, a lot of feedback. Pack one, pick one. It's very Cube, I guess, new to the Cube, kind of, hey, I've got this new Cube. What do you guys think about it type of thing? That's the general type of questions we get. We've talked about this in previous episodes. So if you're looking for a safe space where you're going to get some happy cubing with people like myself and ChillMTG and John Brostoff and Stu and Chris Moore, aka Sandwich, we're all in this group. And we'll be glad to kind of answer your questions, field anything you have. If you're not a user of the Discords or the Reddits, etc., it's just another, or the Twitters. It's just another safe space, in my opinion. And we help make sure that we ensure that it's a safe space.
Absolutely.
So,
and as always, if you love the show, we would really appreciate, give us a 5-star review on your chosen podcast platform. It really helps to get us out there. We also have our Alter Sleeves affiliate link, www.altersleeves.com/UberCube. Check out their products. All kinds of cool stuff. Bling out your cube or your, commander deck or whatever the case may be. And if you use our link, you get 5% off your purchase. Also, go check out Inked Gaming. We have an affiliate link for Inked Gaming, and they will provide you with all the playmats, all the dice bags, all the mouse pads, all the custom products, all the cool art that they have on everything that you need to bling out your cube, your commander deck, or whatever else you're playing that's magic related or otherwise. I know dice is used for D&D and all that kind of cool stuff. So go check them out. Very, very cool products they've got over there. I've actually just purchased a mouse pad from there. Very, very exciting.
You got a mouse pad? Nice.
I do. I'm very excited. I love me. Like, you can tell I'm very into my mouse pads.
Yeah.
As well as play mats for your Magic the Gatherings. Reach out to us on Twitter. We are at UberCubeMTGPod. You can also hit us up via email. We are UberCubeMTGPodcast@gmail.com. And as always, come check us out on the Discord. We are #UberCube, and we want to engage as much as possible, right? Come show us your cubes. Ask for help. Show off your new decks. Show off your archetype. Show off changes that you've made. Show off your mail. Show off a new foil that you've got. Right? We want to see it all.
And
tell us about the Patreon.
The Patreon, it's grown, it's doing pretty well.
Yes,
and we want to thank our good friend Sam and our good friend Preston. Preston, I'm hoping you're at CubeCon. I think you were there last year. It'd be great to hang out with you.
We're going to confirm that, right? So Preston, if you're listening, right, and this was my theory, and I hope I'm correct, but Preston, you bought a doubling cube, and you had a bunch of people sign it at CubeCon 2022. If you are the same Preston, which I really hope you are, and if you're not, that doesn't matter anyway. But if you are the same Preston, then let us know. But again, thank you so much to Preston. Thank you, Sam, for your continued support. It means so much to us. And it goes a long way because I really need a new mic stand. I really do.
Other than that, we're going to say the thing that we always say is, Happy Cube!